This week's Torah portion starts in Deuteronomy 11, some of those passages we were just reading. And there's a lot of warnings for us in here about lawlessness and the deception that is rampant out there in the world. So it starts off with a passage that we've looked at already, we've read, where he talks about, "See, I'm setting before you today a blessing and a curse." The same law, the same Torah, can be either one, can't it? It can be a blessing. It can be a curse. And so when we talk about not wanting to be under the curse of the law, we don't want to be under that, right? But we still want to be under the blessing, don't we? That's an important thing to always keep in mind. He says, the blessing, if you listen to the mitzvot of Adonai your God that I'm commanding you today, that's where the blessing comes from. The blessing comes from listening to and obeying and following and doing. But the curse, if you don't listen, if you do not listen to the mitzvot of Adonai your God, if you ignore them, if you dismiss them, if you don't want to keep them or practice them, that's where you are greatest under the curse of the Torah. If you do not listen to the mitzvot of Adonai your God, but turn from the way I am commanding you today, because turning away means that you're going to go after other gods that you have not known. There are only these two options. There are God's ways, the ways of his kingdom, of the Torah, of his God's law, Adonai's law. And then there are the ways of the kingdom of darkness, ruled by the man of lawlessness, the man who is without God's law, without the Torah. Those are the only two options. And if you turn from Adonai's ways, you are turning to the man of lawlessness' ways. You are turning to the ways, and you're going after other gods. If you're not keeping God's ways, you are being lawless without his Torah. So by not keeping Adonai's ways, you are and will be keeping the ways of another king, another sovereign. That's the kind of language that's involved here. And the Targums even make it more clear, those Aramaic translations of these passages make it more clear that this includes idolatry, and it includes not the ways of his nation, the ways of Israel. That means you're going after the ways of all the other nations. He puts it like this. He says, Moshe the prophet said, "Behold, I have this day set in order before you a blessing and its contrary." So rather than calling it a curse, it's saying this is the blessing and this is the opposite of that. The blessing, if you will be obedient to the commandments of the Lord your God, which I commanded you this day, and its contrary, the opposite, if you will not obey the commandments of the Lord your God, but will go astray from the path which I have taught you this day, in turning aside after the idols of the nations whom thou hast not known. So by not keeping this, it's as if you are acting like I'm not a citizen of Israel. I am not a member of his people. I am not a member of his nation. By not keeping his ways, that's what we are saying. Now, do you get the impression that the Father does not want us to take on the ways of the nations? Does it kind of strike you like that? He doesn't want us to do that because that is effectively taking on their idols. The different ways, the ways of his nation, the ways of his people are not intended to, they're not supposed to mix with or combine with the ways of the nations. He talks about that when he gathers us back from the nations. When he brings us back, we're giving that new heart and the heart of flesh, that we are not supposed to bring those ways back with us. That's what this is all about. This is that foundation that it's laying. So the different ways are not supposed to mix. And so what Adonai, what he is teaching us, what is instructing us in, he's instructing us what his Torah keeps us, prevents us, trains us not to do is he's training us not to turn aside to the idols of the nations, so we are not following the ways of the man of lawlessness. Keeping God's ways. See, we think the man of lawlessness only shows up at the end, but he's really involved all along. Keeping God's ways, keeping his Torah, that is serving him. That is keeping his Torah is worshiping him. You ever thought about it like that? That being obedient to his commands is worship, as opposed to keeping the ways of the nations, as opposed to worshiping their idols. Because keeping the ways of the nations is idolatry. That's serving and worshiping another God instead of the one who is our King. And so when someone comes and says that they don't want to keep the Torah, that to keep Adonai's ways, they don't want the Mosaic covenant. Weren't we reading about that earlier in 1 John? All right, what does he say about that? If you say you have not sinned, if you say this is not for you, then you are a liar, and the truth is not in you. See, they probably don't realize that by saying that I don't, the Mosaic covenant, his Torah, all that stuff, that's not for me. They don't realize what they're really saying is that they really want another king, they want another God, and they're going to serve another king and another God by not wanting his Torah. They want to go after an idol and not the true God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's what that means, according to the Scripture. And God does not want that for his people. He really doesn't want anything that's going to lure our hearts and our minds away from him. That's what he talks about in chapter 12. He says, when he's talking about entering into the land and possessing the land, he says, you must utterly destroy all the places where the nations that you will dispossess served their gods. On the high mountains and on the hills and under every green tree, you are to tear down their altars, smash their pillars, burn their Asherah poles in the fire, and cut down the carved images of their gods, and you are to obliterate their name from that place. You are not to act like this toward Adonai your God. What he's saying is there can be no other authority. There can be no other sovereignty. There can be no other rival allowed in his kingdom, in his land. And so, as long as those things are still there, it's as if God has not fully taken control or possessed the land. Just like the Israelites, they were supposed to go in and drive all the other peoples out of the land. Right? Well, they're also supposed to drive their idols and their gods out of the land as well. That last phrase, verse 4, is very important. That's the driving reason for this call to destroy every other place of worship. It's the reason why, he says, you're supposed to destroy these things, tear them down, burn them up. There are no instructions in any of that to build a new altar on top of those old ones. Y'all see that? There's not one which says that you're supposed to take what they have built and what they have made and how they symbolize their God. You're not supposed to take any of the stuff that they've done and incorporate it into what you do for me. That's what much of history has been about. That's why the Golden Dome is up on top of the Mount Moriah in Jerusalem. When the Muslims conquered, they built that structure on top to show their God's victory, or they interpret it that way. And you see that throughout church history. When there would be a pagan altar, they would tear that down and then they would build a church on top of it or something else like that. He doesn't want them to do that. He wants them to erase it, get rid of it. He does not want to be treated or worshipped like that in the places that those other idols want to be worshiped. All the things that they do to honor their God, their idol, they are not supposed to do to honor him. And that is no matter what their intentions are, that is no matter what their heart is, he rejects that. They can only worship in the way, in the manner in which he instructs. They can only worship in the place that he designates, in the way that he lays out. And when we read about in the tabernacle and all that stuff, he says, rather than seeking those places, those high places, those Asherah poles, he says, rather you are to seek only the place Adonai your God chooses from all your tribes to put his name to dwell. There you will come. There you are to bring your burnt offerings and your sacrifices, your tithes, the offerings of your hand, your vow and free will offerings, and the firstborn of your herd and of your flock. All that stuff of how to do it, haven't they already heard that before? Haven't they already received that in the Torah, in Exodus and in Leviticus and all that? They've already received the how. What they don't know yet is the where. That part hasn't been revealed yet, because that part is in the land. Are they going to get that information in the near future? And where is that place that he eventually shows them? What's that? That's Jerusalem. And he picked that place. Right? His people don't have the right or the authority to pick their own place. They don't get just to think, I think this is a good spot. Why don't we build it here? Why don't we put it all here? They don't have the right, they don't have the authority to pick the place or change the place to some other place than the one that he designates. They can't choose their own ways of doing all of those sacrifices, tithes, and offerings, and free will offerings, and all those things. They can't decide how to do it for themselves. They can't mimic the other nations. They can't change or deviate from what God, their King, has revealed. And do you think his opinion on that has changed? Or is he the same yesterday, today, and forever? Yeah, he's the same. He has not really changed. And despite what so many people say that you hear more and more in our day, the fact that the temple was destroyed, does that change that truth or no? It doesn't. The fact that the temple was destroyed does not change or negate this reality. It does not give anyone permission or license to say, we're going to move away from Jerusalem and we're going to go to some other city. It doesn't give them permission to say, I know the Torah lays out what the priesthood is supposed to be, but we're going to just kind of open it up to anybody and everybody. We're just going to come and show up on our own times, at our own days. We're going to make our own offerings and things like that. We're going to celebrate our own holidays. That's actually the sin of Jeroboam. Because God is the one, Adonai is the one that is choosing all of this. You seek only the place Adonai your God chooses. And what's interesting, again, it's the memra, the word, that Aramaic, of the visible of the invisible God. He is the one who is choosing this place. It's like he's the one who is walking around and taking measurements of everything. In the Targum, in the Aramaic, he says, but in the land which the memra, the word of the Lord your God, will choose out of all your tribes for his Shekinah, his glory, to dwell. Unto the place of his Shekinah shall you have recourse and come hither. His glory isn't in just any place. His glory is in a set place. It isn't in all those high places. It isn't in other cities. It isn't in other nations. It's where he chose, where the memra has chosen to put his glory there, where, again, later to be revealed to be Jerusalem. where his name would dwell. And once that's settled, once that is established, once that has been revealed, there is no going back. There's no other option. Verse 8 puts it like this. He says, you will not do all the things as we are doing here today. He's recognizing you're not in the land yet. You haven't accomplished all of this yet. It's not going to be like it was there here today, where everyone is kind of doing what is right in his own eyes, where you're just kind of making it up a little bit. He says, for you have not yet come to the resting place and the inheritance that Adonai your God is giving you. So even Moses' generation knew that they were waiting for all of this stuff to be settled and designated. And really, even the guys that were writing and putting down the Targums there in the first century knew that they were waiting for a Sabbath rest to come for the ultimate fulfillment of God's promises. Because they had not yet entered into the promised land. They had not yet entered into that rest. It says, it will not be lawful for you to do there as we do here today, whatever anyone thinks fit for himself, for you are not yet come to the sanctuary, to the dwelling of peace, to the inheritance of the land which the Lord your God will give you. They've not yet entered that rest. And we really have not either. We are still looking forward. Hebrews talks about that we are looking forward to that Shabbat rest that is to come. We've not all been changed, right? We've not. We still battle that sin nature. There is in this world, and as it operates today, there's no consistent authority on the throne in Jerusalem that designates, that regulates our worship and what is right and what is good. And what did they understand that rest to look like? Well, they understood it as coming to the sanctuary. That rest that is to come means the sanctuary is in place and you are free and able to come. The temple, that meeting place with God, that is the meeting of rest. Having that access to Him is our peace, is our shalom. So the tabernacle, the sanctuary, the temple, we haven't entered it yet either. So that means what about our future? Doesn't that mean that that place, that sanctuary, that temple is going to be involved in some way? It is the dwelling. It is the residence of Shalom. The Prince of Peace sits there. The Father's house, that is the house of prayer for all nations. That is what our rest is supposed to look like. And all of this must be in the heart, in the midst of the land that He has set apart and designated for His people. Which again, more and more, we're getting closer to that. We're seeing more and more of that. There will one day, be that moment when coming to the sanctuary, coming to the temple, when we hear that phrase, Baruch haba b'shem Adonai. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. That is said on the feast days in the temple, when there is that recognition of Messiah. Verse 11 really confirms this goal in that Aramaic. It says, and to the place which the memra of the Lord, the word of the Lord, the Messiah, will choose to make His glory, His Shekhinah, to dwell there, shall you bring all your oblations, firstlings and tithes, which I commanded you. There shall you offer your sacrifices and hallowed victims. There eat your tithes and the separation of your hand, and all your goodly vows which you have vowed before the Lord. Coming to His sanctuary, coming to the place where His glory dwells, coming to His kingdom, coming to His resting place. That's what we're waiting for. Where you experience His blessing in His land with His people. When you walk in His ways and His laws, when everybody is doing that together, and you're not going out after the way of the lawless, the ways of the nations, the Torahless. This chapter 12 ends with a warning. It ends with a description of what lawlessness looks like. So verse 28, he says, "Take care and listen to all these words that I'm commanding you, so that it may go well with you and your children after you, when you do what is good and right in the eyes of Adonai your God." That is what he wants for us. And if you think of your children's future and you take your children's future seriously, then you're going to want this for them, right? This is generational thinking. He says, "When Adonai your God cuts off before you the nations that you are going in to dispossess, when you have dispossessed them and settled in their land," here's the warning: "be careful not to be trapped into imitating them after they have been destroyed before you. Do not inquire about their gods, saying, 'How do these nations serve? How do they worship their God?' Because I will do the same." Because that is not a good idea. Don't try to mix what I've told you with what they do. Because you are not to act like this toward Adonai your God. For every abomination of Adonai, everything that he hates, everything that he considers just defiling, they have done to and for their gods. They even burn their sons and daughters in the fire to their gods. Sacrificing their children is like the worst thing you can do. And we're not far from that, sadly. But God has watched all the nations do all those terrible things to and for their gods, and he wants nothing to do with any of it. He is not pleased with it. He is not honored by it. It grieves him to see anybody do it. And it grieves him to see especially those that are his people, those that he loves, fall into this trap. It grieves him to see those he loves give worship to another or attempt to worship him in the ways of an idol. I mean, can you imagine what a conversation would be like between a husband and a wife? You know, it can be either side of this equation, where they would say, "I love you, and that's why I'm doing this. I love you because I love you." But then the other side comes back and says, "But I hate that. And I've told you I hate that. And yet you keep doing it. How can you say you love me when I've told you I hate that and you keep doing it?" "But I did it for you." "Doesn't that matter? Don't you care what's in my heart?" See, God sees that whole kind of conversation no differently than saying, "I love you, and that's why I'm committing adultery." That makes sense? If we on a human level could not handle that, could not deal with that coming from our spouse, understand that we're the ones saying it every day. We say that every day to him. And so we have to check our heart. We have to understand that's what he hears so often from us, from me, from you. We always need to be willing to check our actions, to check our motivations in light of what the Scripture says. Because our fallen nature, it comes so easily, so natural for us to go astray after the other gods. Messiah has come to redeem us from that, to change us from that, to set us on the right path. And what's worse, not only does our own nature work against us, but Adonai knows that the enemy of our souls, he's not just passive in this whole thing. He is waiting. He's not just waiting for us to wander off on our own. The enemy is actually actively working to try to get us off the right path. He is sending false teachers and false prophets to lead us, to entice us away from God's way. Yeshua gave many warnings about that, even and especially in the last days. This is what we should expect to see in these days. In Matthew 24, he says, as he was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us, when will these things happen? What will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" It's a good question. Yeshua answered them with, "Be careful." If you really want to know about that, you really need to understand that you have to be careful. You have to be careful in the same way that verse 30 of chapter 12 in Deuteronomy started off with, "Be careful not to be trapped into imitating them." Be careful, he says, that no one leads you astray. For many will come in my name, saying, "I am the Messiah," and will lead many astray. Many will come in his name, in Yeshua's name, and that's a wide range of what that can look like. That can be like people claiming to be Yeshua, which there are some of those out there. There's a guy down in Florida that says, "I am Jesus, returned." There's a guy in Russia, I think, that said that. There's people all over the place that say that. It's amazing how many Jesuses there are out there in the world. They can be claiming to be the fulfillment of all the messianic promises. They can be claiming to, "I am just doing all of these things," or "I'm saying all of these things because at his direction and at his leadership. But it says many will come, but it also says many will be led astray. Leading up to his return as king. Bar Kokhba was touted as Messiah all the way back in like 130 A.D. Muhammad claimed to be the other counselor in the 600s or so. There's been many others over the years. And so if we know that's coming, what do we do about that? How do we prepare for that? How are these claimants supposed to be evaluated? How do we recognize them? How was Yeshua evaluated in the first century by his own people? How do many among the Jewish people evaluate him today? The Torah, actually, this portion provides the answer whether you are following the true God or the Torahless one. Here is the basic standard. It goes back to chapter 13. He says, "Whatever I command you, you must take care to do. You are not to add to it or take away from it." Now, we've heard things like that before, right? Don't add or subtract, all that. Now, consider Yeshua's words, whether they are consistent or inconsistent with this statement from Matthew 5. He says, "Do not think I came to abolish the Torah or the prophets. I did not come to abolish, but to fulfill." Is that consistent or inconsistent with that statement from Deuteronomy 13? Is he trying to add to it? Is he trying to take away from it? No. Even the next one, "Amen, I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not the smallest letter or the seraph shall ever pass away from the Torah until all things come to pass." Is this consistent or inconsistent with the Torah? It's still consistent, isn't it? He says, "Therefore, whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others the same shall be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever keeps and teaches them, this one shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven." Is that consistent or inconsistent? That's still very consistent with whatever I command you, you must take care to do. You are not to add to it or take away from it. All of that, all of his teaching is consistent with that standard. But what happens later when Yeshua's followers, decades, maybe even centuries later, say something different? What they say, Jesus did away with the Torah, the law. You're no longer under law, but under grace. What if many years later, they make changes to the Sabbath or make it to another day, or if they say that, by declaring all foods clean mean that we can eat anything that we want, or the feast days, that they mean nothing because we've got a whole slew of new ones. Without realizing it, what have they done to themselves first? Have they made themselves the least in the kingdom? Because they're teaching other people, they're teaching others the same, that they should break these commandments. They're the least in the kingdom. They're also making Yeshua the least in the kingdom if they're doing it in his name. But without realizing it, what's worse is they've turned Yeshua into a false prophet and a false Messiah. I don't think they realize it. Because that Deuteronomy passage, we just read the first verse. It goes on from there. He says, suppose a prophet or a dreamer of dreams rises up among you and gives you a sign or a wonder, and the sign or wonder he spoke to you comes true. That's the important kicker there. That changes things a little bit. If what they say or what they spoke doesn't really come true, it's like, well, okay, I can forget about you. You're not really all that important. But suppose it does. While saying, let us follow other gods that you have not known, and let us serve, let us worship them. By definition of what we've already been reading, he's talking about the gods of the nations. This is the standard. Now, many of the Jewish leaders of the day in Yeshua's lifetime, did they acknowledge, did they recognize that Yeshua could do miracles? That he could heal the sick, that he could give sight to the blind? That was not in question. They pretty much all acknowledged that. But this last part was the part that they were wondering about. Was he encouraging people to disobey God's commands? Because disobeying God's commands is the same as following another god. To change the laws of the king is to have another king. By saying that you don't need to worry about the Torah anymore, you're turning him into a false prophet, essentially making Yeshua encourage people to follow after other gods and worship them. And the signs and the miracles, all those things that is recognized and known that he did, even if what they prophesy, even if that comes true, that's not enough. That's not enough to prove that he is a prophet, because the false prophet can have all of that. The false prophet can have signs or wonders that come true. But what settles the issue is what they say and what they teach. If that goes against the Torah, and if that encourages serving other gods and their ways, and if they do that, if they say, let's not worry about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, none of the miracles matter. It says in verse 4, you must not listen to the words of that prophet, even if it's come to pass, or that dreamer of dreams. For Adonai your God is testing you to find out whether you love Adonai your God with all your heart and with all your soul. Are you truly loyal to him, or are you going to run off at the first flashy thing that comes along, the first shiny object that gets your attention? The first alternative is Adonai your God you will follow. Are you loyal to him? And to him you will fear. His mitzvot you will keep, and to his voice you will listen. Him you will serve, and to him you will cling. You must not listen to such a prophet. It's a test, one that God hopes his people will pass, hopes that they will cling only to him. Now again, they knew he was doing signs and miracles, but their accusations that they made, even when he was on trial, they were following this passage. What did they accuse him of? Well, they accused him of breaking the Sabbath when he healed a man born blind. They accused him of speaking against the temple. They accused him and the way of worship that was going on there. They accused him of claiming God as his father, and the works that he was doing was the same. They accused him, of claiming to fulfill all those messianic prophecies in a way that they didn't agree with or understand, like the Son of Man coming on the cloud. And so they accused him of blasphemy. In their mind, they were advocating, Yeshua was advocating another God and other ways. Now were they right or wrong in their conclusion? They are definitely wrong in their conclusion. But they weren't wrong in their method. They weren't wrong in the desire to protect the people or protect the faith of the potential of a false Messiah. They were very right in wanting to do that. If the Sanhedrin concluded that Yeshua was the Messiah and they were wrong about that and he really wasn't, that's happened before. They'd say, hey, this guy must be the Messiah. There would be consequences to that if they were wrong. John 11 highlights one of them. He says, the ruling Kohanim and the Pharisees called a meeting of the Sanhedrin. What are we doing? They asked. This man is performing many signs. He's performing all the signs and the expectations of what Messiah is going to do. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him. And then here's the concern. And the Romans will come and take away both our holy place and our nation. If we go along with this and he's not the guy, then we're in a lot of trouble. What they failed to realize, though, if you don't go along with this and he is the guy, are you in a lot of trouble? They could see one of those consequences. They couldn't see the other. Yeshua didn't want them to go after other gods and serve them. He didn't want to break the Torah. He didn't encourage the people to break the commands of God, but he in fact was talking to them about how to keep them better. Rather than undermining the Torah, Yeshua sought to remove all the corruption of the practice that was going on in the day. He was wanting to teach it correctly, apply it fully, to bring it to its fullness. They didn't recognize the true prophet like unto Moses, the Messiah. They didn't recognize the time of his appearing. And there were consequences for missing. Yeshua was very consistent with this. He rose up, he gave signs and wonders, and he never said, let's follow other gods. Despite centuries later, followers of Yeshua feel authorized to change things in his name, rejecting the Torah, rejecting the Jewish people. Based on this standard, if that was true and they were right in doing all of those things, should the Jewish people listen to that? No. See, the way theologians and church leaders have talked about Jesus and Yeshua for centuries, especially in how they've rejected anything Jewish, or how God has rejected or replaced them, persecuted them, all those types of things, it's no wonder that when we try to tell them about his miracles, when we try to tell them about his resurrection, that's not enough for them to believe. because the Torah warned them not to be deceived. Yeshua warned them not to be deceived. And he's warning us because as the day approaches, is this going to be getting better or is this going to be getting worse in terms of the many will come and the false prophets? That's going to be increasing, isn't it? The deception is going to be increasing. In the last days, claiming to be him, claiming to be from him, claiming to be a follower of him, are they going to be successful in deceiving many? Yes. They might even be able to do alleged miracles. You might see them. There's a lot of videos on the internet that you look at and say, I don't know if that's real, but I'm not sure either, right? Y'all seen some of those? Well, there might be some of them that you see, and it's like, no, that really did happen. Because even the Antichrist is supposed to receive a fatal wound, right? Isn't he supposed to live? One of the interpretations, anyway. We understand that anyone trying to share the good news of Jesus, the good news about Yeshua, who speaks against the law of God, who speaks against Moses, you're describing a false prophet. And you are allying yourself not with the Messiah, not with the King. You're actually, if you're speaking against the Torah and you're speaking against Moses, you're actually aligning yourself with the other guy, the man of lawlessness. You think you're doing it in his name, but you're actually doing it in the other guy's name. It's important to know. You are called to see past the miracles and the fancy words and the popular show or the size of the crowd. You're supposed to know them by their fruit, what they say, what they teach, what they allow. That will reveal them better than the miracle, better than the show. When they call good evil and evil good, you're supposed to see through whatever they do, whatever miracle they do. That one should be easy, right? If they're calling good evil and evil good, and we're seeing a lot of that, that's easy for us to recognize. But it's when you hear the things that you like, it's when you hear the things you might even agree with, that makes it harder to see through. When you hear things like, what our culture loves to hear especially, just keep doing what you're doing, follow your heart and your desires, you don't need to change a thing. When you hear people making Jewish people the target, blaming them for everything, rejecting the Torah in the life of believers, that's the spirit of lawlessness at work. And the false messiahs, the Antichrist, are going to deceive many because he tells them what their itching ears want to hear, because people don't want to put up with the truth. They don't want to put up with sound doctrine. But you and me, you and I, we are called to recognize them for what they are. And this Torah portion is supposed to train you for that purpose. And it's no accident that this Torah portion includes in chapter 14. Y'all looked at chapter 14, what's in there? What's that chapter about? That's about the clean and unclean food. Somehow or another, that seems to be important for helping you recognize what is true and not. And it's no accident that chapter 16, what's that one about? Oh, look, it's the pilgrimage feast, Passover, and the Feast of Weeks and Tabernacles. Things which are not even on most radar of most of those who claim the name of Yeshua. Wasn't on mine. Not for a long time. We look for the fruit. You will recognize the false by knowing what is true and walking in the truth. You look for the fruit that grows from the tree of life, fruit in keeping with repentance and that return to the Torah. That's how some of the liturgy that we even use here will talk about. This is one of the weekday shacharit about the Torah. It says, when the ark rested, Moses would say, "Return, Adonai, to the myriads and thousands of Israel. Arise, Adonai, unto your resting place," which, as we've been reading about in this Torah portion, right, is where? Is Jerusalem. You and the ark of your strength, let your priests clothe themselves in righteousness, and let your devoted ones sing in joy. For the sake of David, your servant, do not reject your anointed. For I have given you good instruction. Do not forsake my Torah. And then this was one that we did just last week. She is a tree of life to those who grasp her. Whoever holds fast to her will be made happy. Her ways are pleasant ways, and all her paths are peace. O Lord, turn us back to you, and we will come back. Renew our days as they were in the past. And so we call upon him to help us. Help us submit ourselves, our lives, our ways to him, so that we may resist the devil, that we might recognize the lawless one. Help us to resist him, not by going our own way, which is really going that other guy's way, but going after God's way, staying on his path, on that highway of holiness, asking for help in discerning, having eyes and ears to hear, to see the deception that many others are going to fall for and they're going to miss. So that when we stand firm against the devil's scheme, once we have submitted to him, then he should flee from us. And we will see the power and the glory of our King. And as chapter 13 ends, it says, so be obedient to the word, to the memra of the Lord your God, to keep all his commandments which I command you this day, that you may do what is right before the Lord your God. In the eyes of your King, you may do what is right and recognize what is false. Because he wants us, he desires us to serve and honor only him. Amen.